Welcome to the LeanBlog podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. This is episode number 38 of the LeanBlog podcast for March 10th, 2008. Our guest today is a returning guest. He is Bob Emiliani from the Center for Lean Business Management, and most recently the author of the book Practical Lean Leadership. We're going to be talking today about that book. I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's a nice workbook format that prompts you to think through your own lean leadership behaviors and how that fits into your own organization. So it's definitely a unique addition to the lean literature, and I hope you'll take a look at it. As always, thanks for listening. Well, Bob, thanks again for joining us here on the LeanBlog podcast to talk about your new book, Practical Lean Leadership.
Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Bob, I was wondering if we could first talk about how you discovered and started learning about lean within your career.
Sure. My first exposure to lean management was reading Masaki Amai's book, Kaizen, the Key to Japan's Competitive Success, and that was around 1991. But it wasn't really until 1994 when I left Pratt & Whitney's engineering organization, where I had been the prior 7 years, and joined the manufacturing organization in the summer of 1994. I was a business unit manager there, and we were undergoing a lean transformation, and so I participated in many kaizens facilitated by Shingijutsu Sensei. So the kaizens were just a fabulous experience, and they ended up laying the seeds for what would later become a passion of mine, which was to comprehend lean leadership and to create practical lean leadership development pathways that people could use. One of the things I observed with the lean transformation we were undergoing was that some managers were much better than others at leading their part of the organization in ways that were consistent with what Shingijutsu Sensei were teaching us. I basically, had that observation, and I wanted to know why and dig more into that.
Sure. Well, leadership's long been a big challenge in lean management, and you focus a lot of your writing and papers and books on the topic. How did you get interested or started in that direction?
Well, first of all, it seemed to be the major critical issue in order to continue along with what the Shingijutsu Sensei were teaching us. Again, some leaders were better at it than others. And what the company did to try and help this process was put people like me around the 1995-96 timeframe through state-of-the-art, very expensive leadership development programs that were run by industrial psychologists and leadership development specialists. And these were on the order of $7,000 or $8,000 per week. So they were, expensive thing to go do. And these were the conventional sort of training with respect to leadership development, which at the time was helpful. Mm-hmm. But I also noticed that these leadership development programs just didn't have much of an impact on most managers. And in addition to that, I wanted to improve my own leadership skills further down the road, and thought that these methods had some limitations with respect to ease of understanding and practicality and so forth.
Okay.
So these things motivated me to rethink the problem and to try and come up with something that I thought would work better. The things that the Shingijutsu Sensei were teaching me on the shop floor in the 1994 timeframe struck a chord with respect to leadership development. And one of the things I started to see was analogs between lean tools and processes and leadership development. Mm-hmm. And these analogs that I had seen was something that I even presented at a meeting of Pratt & Whitney's entire operations leadership team in November 1995. So I had a great forum to present these ideas. But after that, in 1996, the book Lean Thinking came out, and the light bulb went off in my head in a really big way. And it became clear to me that the 5 principles that Womack and Jones presented in that book could easily be used in the context of lean leadership development. And so what I did is I continued to think about these ideas for maybe another year or something like that, and then In 1998, I wrote a couple of papers that illustrated how lean tools and processes and how Womack and Jones's 5 lean principles could be applied to leadership development. And the papers were titled Continuous Personal Improvement, and the other one was Lean Behaviors. And the Lean Behaviors actually won an award as the best paper for that journal that year. Mm-hmm. It was in those papers that I coined the terms lean behaviors and behavioral waste, and in which it clearly showed the connection also to the respect for people principle.
Mm-hmm. And then after those papers were published, you ended up leaving the corporate world to go study and teach lean full-time, right?
Yep, that's right. I left the corporate world in 1999 essentially to pursue these ideas further in a university setting, because that gives you the opportunity to offer training courses to executives and so forth, and also to develop new courses. And I ended up developing a lean leadership course for MBA students and master's degree students in the business school where I was at. Mm-hmm. All of our students were working professionals, so just about everybody. I mean, it was something like 99% of our students worked full-time for a living, and they were typically between the ages of 25 and 45, mostly in their probably 30s on average. And it ended up being a great platform to test these new ideas and obtain feedback for improvement. Mm-hmm. It led to a bunch of brand new ideas, and over time, just thousands of improvements to the ideas and the materials. The course for the master's degree and MBA students were extremely popular, and I always got great reviews from them because it was such an innovative way to look at the leadership mm-hmm. problem in general, and specifically related to lean.
Sure.
So I think it's worth mentioning. I had some ground rules in my head for what I wanted to create here, based upon that very expensive leadership training that I had gone through some years before. And it had to be, the first one is it had to be simpler than what was currently in use, which was this fairly complex leadership development programs rooted in industrial psychology and organizational behavior and mm-hmm. so forth. Second one is it had to be practical and easy to understand. The third one, it had to be fully consistent with lean principles and practices. It couldn't deviate from that at all. Fourth one, it had to use the same language, concepts, and tools that are found in lean management. Fifth one, it had to be much less expensive than these traditional lean development programs. And then finally, it had to have, of course, some learn-by-doing characteristics. I mean, you have to take in the ideas and then practice them on a daily basis, etc.
Okay.
So what emerged was a new process for developing lean leaders that was distinct from traditional leadership development and organizational behavior models, and at the same time, though, was complementary to them. But what it ends up being, what I create, is much more accessible to greater numbers of managers. So I've been doing the face-to-face executive training and teaching the Lean Leadership Graduate Course for almost 10 years now. Mm-hmm. And, the fact is you can only reach a fairly small number of executives and mid-level managers that way. So I decided to write a workbook that covered a subset of the training program mm-hmm. and the grad school leadership course that I developed over the years. So it essentially covers the core material in 9 or 10 challenging steps.
Yeah, and before we dig into the book a little bit, did you write the book because the workshops and the classes you teach really aren't available to the general public? They're really only available to the business school students, or do you offer workshops?
Well, the workshops are typically not open enrollment, so mm-hmm. they're customized by a particular company, and it usually involves a dozen or so executives from the senior management team. And so, they're not widely available as an open enrollment type of course.
Okay, but if somebody in their company was interested in that, they could contact you through your website, I assume?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, sure. And what is that website again for people listening?
TheCLBM.com.
Okay.
TheCLBM.com.
Okay, Center for Lean Business Management. Right.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about practical lean leadership and the book. I mean, there's a lot of books out there. What would you say is different about this book in particular? How's it going to be helpful for people?
Well, what's different about it is it goes well beyond leadership behaviors, and it drills down into leadership beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And most leadership trainers and writers stop at the behavior level and don't go further. And I made the very same, what I'll call a mistake, for a while, and then had a breakthrough in 2003. And what I found is you really have to dig deeper, because that's where the core issues lie,
Mm-hmm.
which make lean leadership such a challenge for most managers. And so, anyway, how I do this is by applying lean principles, tools, and processes, and including value stream maps and standardized work, but in totally new context, in ways that people haven't seen before. And since most managers who are engaged in a lean transformation have at least some familiarity with these things, maybe not a lot, but at least some, it's a relatively simple extension to the world of lean leadership development. So if they're familiar with it in the work-related sense, then it's easy to extend it to lean leadership development.
Mm-hmm.
So it differs dramatically from traditional training, which focuses almost exclusively on soft skills, and most people find that it's lacking or is ambiguous in describing, how leaders should apply what they learn to the workplace every day.
Mm-hmm.
And some managers, from their perspective, see these soft skills potential as even conflicting with their hard skills.
Mm.
So what practical lean leadership does is it breaks down this soft skills, hard skills divide, and is much more explicit in its presentation of how executives must think and what they need to do every day in order to deepen their knowledge and their knowledge and practice of lean management, and to reinforce the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I think managers will find it to be very refreshing and very practical approach that will be a big help in their efforts to become lean leaders. And I think it's also very timely, the timing of this book, because in some of my other books, I've described how we face a critical period here, in my view, in which lean management may soon begin to fade if executives continue to have difficulty becoming lean leaders, and if they also struggle to practice the respect for people principle.
Right. Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about that, and sometimes that concept of respect for people can seem really fuzzy, right? I mean, we all agree conceptually, oh, sure, we should have respect for people, but what does that translate then into how I act and behave, or even challenging some of those beliefs, right?
Yep, and that's this workbook. In fact, all of my books really, and my efforts, my papers starting in 1998, and before that, my thinking on this was all evolving in the direction of the respect for people principle, and why people don't understand that, why it's so difficult to comprehend and apply. So it's something I've been working on for a long time now, and it's seems simple to understand. The words most people can comprehend, they think, but it's actually much more nuanced and much more detailed.
Yeah, and one of the things I liked about the book is that workbook format, and it might be hard for listeners to picture, but with each chapter there are a lot of questions and spaces for you to literally write out and reflect and answer questions about your own work and your own environment and your own beliefs. That's one thing I really found to be helpful with the book, the way it was structured that way.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
One thing I wanted to ask you about some of the sections of the book. We often talk about value-added, non-value-added activities in Lean in terms of what's happening in a production process, or what are people in a hospital doing. But you spend a lot of time talking about value-added and non-value-added behaviors and beliefs. So I was wondering if you could share some examples of some of those management behaviors that you would consider to be wasteful. Sure.
Non-value-added but necessary leadership behaviors exist simply because people are not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
These types of behaviors are difficult to avoid, or in some cases just unavoidable. Some examples might be non-work-related conversations, being impatient, aggressive, or confrontational, self-promotion, perhaps over-communicating. These are what are called type 1 waste in lean parlance.
Mm-hmm.
These are difficult for most people to see as type 1 waste, and then so therefore it's hard for them to figure out what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you would not want to completely eliminate non-work related conversations,
right,
for obvious reasons. But, in some cases they can be very disruptive or consume valuable time.
Right.
And I think we've all been in meetings with various people, and we get off on tangents, and, we got important business, and it's in certain ways disruptive, and it's certainly consuming time and so forth. So what the book talks about, the workbook, is, the leader's main focus should really be on type 2 waste, because that's much easier to understand than eliminate.
Yeah.
And as their learning progresses about what value-added leadership behaviors are and wasteful leadership behaviors are, that being type 2 waste, then they can begin to comprehend type 1 behaviors as waste, to think about, what, if anything, they need to do about it.
Yeah. So you talk about non-work-related conversations. I guess you're not suggesting, or I may think of an example that, if we were at work and we're talking about the big basketball game tomorrow, that you could look and say, well, the customer doesn't value us talking about basketball. Not value added from a customer perspective, but I guess somebody could rationalize that and say, well, we're relating to each other, we're building our working relationship, which then allows us to be more effective in serving the customer's needs. Is that why you might consider it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. Yep.
Okay.
It's bonding, it's team building, it serves other functions.
Okay. But what's an example of the type of behavioral waste that really can't be rationalized or doesn't serve any sort of necessary function?
That's good. Let me think about that for a minute. So it's type 1 waste that doesn't serve any function at all. Well, it really depends upon the context and the setting, and how people deploy these particular behaviors. And so it's hard to say categorically what that might be. This is something that I give as an assignment to my students in the leadership course, to identify the type 1 waste, the non-value added but necessary or unavoidable behaviors. And they struggle with that, because as they start to think about it, they start to see type 1 category behaviors as waste. I would say maybe negative thoughts, biases, or stereotypes might be particularly troublesome.
So maybe it's an exercise for each listener here to sort of try to step back and reflect on that in their own setting or for themselves?
Definitely, yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one other thing I really liked in the book, it seemed unique, was the way you defined kaizen. And I was wondering if you could share that and explain some of that with us.
Sure. The literal translation of kaizen is change, kai, for the better, zen. But its meaning is in a multilateral context, which few people understand. What they typically do is they understand kaizen more narrowly as continuous improvement. And what that does, it can invite some confusion and lead to the misapplication of kaizen in a unilateral or zero-sum context. The problem with that is that ends up violating the respect for people principle. The change must be non-zero sum. In other words, it must be good for all stakeholders. So, for example, in contrast to that, a change that is good for the company or its stakeholders, but is bad for employees, suppliers, or customers is not kaizen. Another example is a change that is good for engineering, but bad for manufacturing or sales is not kaizen, and so on. So what we're trying to do is, when we make an improvement in one area, we cannot disrupt upstream or downstream processes, which is often what happens in the application of kaizen when people understand it more narrowly as continuous improvement in a zero-sum context.
Yeah, and that's that whole multilateral context. That part of the definition is what jumped out to me as something that I think you're right, that often gets missed, and I guess another way of saying that might be that it leads to sub-optimization if you're not focused on the entire system or focused on that balance.
Yep, That's right.
Well, Bob, one other thing I particularly liked about the book was the chapter on 50 errors that people should avoid in a lean implementation. And I was wondering if you could tell us about the one error confusing what you call real lean versus fake lean. What's the difference there?
Yep. Real lean is the non-zero sum, meaning win-win application of both lean principles, continuous improvement and respect for people.
Mm-hmm.
Fake lean, on the other hand, is the zero-sum or win-lose application of just the one lean principle, continuous improvement. So fake lean is narrowly focused on the tools of continuous improvement. Mm-hmm. And you may have heard managers with the slogan of flawless execution or something similar to that. That's a problem because that basically supports fake lean in that it cuts off people's desire to try new things and learn. And of course, in lean management, we need people to try new things and learn new things and be engaged. So we have to be careful, in terms of how we understand the lean principles and how we apply them.
Right. It seems like that concept of flawless execution maybe implies that people would be afraid to admit having a problem. Therefore, we're pretending like they were flawless, maybe.
Yeah, and also just an unwillingness to experiment and try new things, which is what you do, of course, in kaizen and in other lean activities as well. Mm-hmm. So it kind of shuts down people's willingness to experiment and try new things.
Okay. Well, really good point, and there are a lot of other good points in the book. Again, it is called Practical Lean Leadership. And I want to thank you again, Bob, for joining us here on the podcast. And in closing, I was wondering if you could remind our listeners again how they can find you on the web and find information about yourself and your book and your different course offerings.
Sure. The URL is theclbm.com. It's theclbm.com. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in the podcast.
Okay. Well, sure thing. I've enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll have you back again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. This has been the LeanBlog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.